It is generally believed that Sren Aabye Kierkegaard, a Danish theologian, philosopher, poet, social critic, and religious author, was the father of existential philosophy. The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly one you'll never have. There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, the other is to refuse to believe what is true. I feel as if I were a piece in a game of chess when my opponent says of it, that piece cannot be moved. To cheat oneself out of love is the most terrible deception. It is an eternal loss for which there is no reparation, either in time or in eternity. I feel as if I were a piece in a game of chess when my opponent says of it, that piece cannot be moved. To cheat oneself out of love is the most terrible deception. It is an eternal loss for which there is no reparation, either in time or in eternity. To love another in spite of his weaknesses and errors and imperfections is not perfect love. No, to love is to find him lovable in spite of and together with his weakness and errors and imperfections. The thing that cowardice fears most is decisive. God creates out of nothing. Wonderful, you say. Yes, to be sure, but he does what is still more wonderful, he makes saints out of sinners. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. It is essential, in relationships and all tasks, that we concentrate only on what is most significant and important. Take away paradox from the thinker and you have a professor. The tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. I feel as if I were a piece in a game of chess, when my opponent says of it, that piece cannot be moved. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays. Men think that it is impossible for a human being to love his enemies, for enemies are hardly able to endure the sight of one another. Well, then, if a person does not become what he understands, then he does not understand it either. There are many people who arrive at conclusions in life much the way schoolboys do. They cheat their teachers by copying the answer book without having worked. I found I had less and less to say, until finally, I became silent, and began to listen. I discovered in the silence, the voice of God. Take a chance and you may lose. Take not a chance and you have lost already. People settle for a level of despair they can tolerate and call it happiness. The unhappy person is never present to themselves because they always live in the past or the future. Marriage brings one into fatal connection with custom and tradition, and traditions and customs are like the wind and the weather, altogether incalculable. If I could prescribe only one remedy for all the ills of the modern world, I would prescribe. Boredom is the root of all evil, the despairing refusal to be oneself. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays. Do it or don't do it, you will regret both. Hope is passion for what is possible. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. Listen to the cry of a woman in labor at the hour of giving birth, look at the dying man's struggle at his last extremity, and then tell me whether something that begins and ends thus could be intended for enjoyment.